Good evening. Striking hospital workers in the south today took their case to the public. While nurses were picketing the main entrance to the public hospital in Dunedin, their colleagues were marching through the streets of Invercargill. Kathy Graham reports.
But in spite of what union organisers called solid support, some nurses still went on duty.
We've had lots of support from the public. There's been no acrimony or any problems. Everything's been very good, actually.
Inside the hospital, staff and volunteers were reported to be very busy, but the authorities wouldn't let us film in the wards. Hundreds of nurses and hospital workers throughout the south took part in the industrial action. It'll continue until 7 in the morning and will possibly be repeated next week if there's no settlement of the hospital workers' claims. The Nurses Association complained there had been threats of suspension at Balclutha and Invercargill, but both hospitals denied they'd intimidated staff. A Southland spokesman said they'd merely pointed out to staff their obligations to their patients. In general, the authorities seemed pleased at the way their arrangements had worked out.
My main worry has been getting volunteers. You know, towards the end of last week I was quite worried that we wouldn't have sufficient people. But that's not a problem anymore. The response has been fantastic.
About 200 people helped out at Cherry Farm, and they're being asked to return next week if there's more industrial action.
The Dunedin City Council has come under attack from one of its management staff for not spending enough money on the city's streets. A street planning engineer says the streets are getting worse at the same time the council is cutting back on spending. The claims were made at a national engineering conference in Dunedin today. Mark Price with that story.
Presenting a paper at the conference, street planning engineer Noel Reid suggested the mundane work of keeping Dunedin streets in order was suffering while money was being spent on high-profile works like the Octagon redevelopment and the improvements to the municipal chambers.
In the opinion of the management team, it must be a higher priority. They prefer to spend money in the Octagon and upgrading the municipal chambers.
Would you agree with that, though?
I'm a roading engineer. I should really only comment on roading matters. It's the council's prerogative to decide where they should spend the money.
He says shape correction, curbing and channelling needs more money, not less. Late last year, the City Council decided to cut back on the amount of money available to the roading section over the next 3 years.
It's not getting sufficient to maintain the assets we've got. It would require significantly more expenditure to simply maintain the assets without improving them.
It's when roads get like this that they need shape correction. That's a major resurfacing job that costs about $15 a square metre. The council has a computer system keeping track of how much should be done each year. Mr Reid says the backlog of work is high at the moment, but with cuts to the roading budget, it will increase further.
Works Committee Chairman Brian Arnold says the council has turned a lot of attention to a backlog of drainage work. He says there's never enough rates money to keep all departments happy. As for the Octagon, he says that's a much-needed boost for civic pride and confidence. And there are further changes planned for the Octagon. The Octagon Picture Theatre and the old taxi depot next door are to be demolished in May to make way for a new theatre complex. The owners, the Methodist Church, won't say who their major client is until the project is through the planning stages. They do say the theatre complex will be an exciting one. Some of the tall ships which sailed to Australia for the First Fleet's reenactment have become a familiar sight in southern waters, and one has made Dunedin her base. The Tradewind's been taking international voyages from here to the sub-Antarctic. Lee Davies went on board to find out what's involved in crewing a traditional sailing ship.
The First Fleet reenactment for Australia's bicentenary fired the imaginations of all those who love the sea, and they weren't content to let it end in Sydney. That epic voyage has led to a fleet of tall ships taking working passengers on trips around the Pacific. The Tradewind is one of them. Rescued by skipper Mark Hammond from life as a houseboat in Amsterdam, she's become a familiar sight in southern waters, taking adventurers to the sub-Antarctic. This lot's off to the Auckland Islands, Campbell Island and the Snares, and they range in age from 20s to 70s. Even though they pay to take the trip, they're expected to sail the Tradewind themselves. That's supposed to be part of the experience, and it's what attracts most people to a journey like this. The Tradewind sails with 8 permanent crew members who are on hand to do the tricky things and to teach the novices what's needed to sail a 2-masted topsail schooner. By the time Tradewind leaves the port of Dunedin, the crew at least is confident the trainees will be able to cope. At the outset, though, it's the skipper who takes the helm. As soon as the ship's on its way, teaching the trainees begins in earnest.
Clockwise around the top, figure of 8. And another one. One more.
And sailing the Tradewind means doing everything, including taking the helm. Sailing a tall ship, they say, is an unrivalled experience. That's why, even though the bicentenary's over, the fleet will sail on.
As long as the weather was good, I think that would be magnificent. A theatre restaurant for Festival Week made its Dunedin debut last night. The season is sold out already, and judging by last night's triumphant opening, the city may be seeing a lot more of this type of entertainment. Jim Moore joined last night's Full House for a cabaret show featuring the music of the war years.
Her Majesty was just a gal when last night's songs were being sung. In fact, many of them go back to the Great War and before. But there's still magic in them, and last night's performers conjured it up easily. Every song that ever inspired the fighting men and their loved ones at home was served up, along with the 3-course meal. The show's director says the recipe isn't too complicated.
Sing long songs, yeah, particularly from the First World War. I think a lot of the older people will remember songs like Pack Up Your Troubles and It's a Long Way to Tipperary. And the whole idea is really to get the audience involved as much as possible, and that's why we've chosen those sorts of numbers.
We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried line. Have you any dirty washing, brother dear? We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried line, 'cause the washing day is here. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So hang out the troubles in your own head bag and smile, smile, smile. Nursey, come over here and hold my hand. I feel awful shy. Nursey, when I look at you, my heart goes goo-goo-goo. Nursey, Nursey, I'm getting worsey, what you gonna do? Heart of my heart, meant friends were dearer than. Too bad we had to part. Too bad we had to part. I know a tear would glisten if once more I could listen to that gang that sang Heart of my heart, heart of my heart.
The audience greeted the songs like old friends they hadn't heard from in years. And the veterans in the audience, who knew the unofficial risque versions of some of them, kept the secret to themselves.
Bless all the sergeants and WO1s. Bless all the corporals and their Lincoln sons, 'cause we're saying goodbye to them all. As back to their billets they crawl. You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up my lads, bless them all.
By the middle of the evening, it was hard to keep the patrons off the stage. These were their songs, songs that recalled the good times of youth and the camaraderie of combat, and the odd, bittersweet memory, too personal for a sing-along in the barracks.
Time would come for roll call, time for us to part. Darling, I'd caress you and press you to my heart. And there, 'neath that far-off lantern light, I'd hold you tight. We'd kiss goodnight, my lily.
A classy treatment of Lily Marlene from Jean Leonard. And theatre restaurants seem to prove very popular in Southland too. Now to the 3 o'clock temperatures and what in some areas has been a rather muggy day. There's certainly a remarkable consistency about these temperatures. It was sunny in Half Moon Bay and 19. In fact, it was 19 for a lot of places today. In Ranfurly it was fine in 21, Lumsden 20, Queenstown fine in 22, Wanaka fine 25, the high of 28 in Alexandra. It was sunny in Tayana and 24 degrees today. Now we're predicting highs tomorrow for Invercargill of 18 degrees, which is great if you're visiting Invercargill. It's all part of Festival Week down there. And 18 degrees tomorrow in Dunedin as well. Good for our Festival Week as well. Have a good night. Good night.